This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial.
Donald Trump, convicted felon.
Tiny fiddle.
Donald Trump, 34 counts, guilty. Let's go to New York City. Reggie Cecchini standing by for this huge historic day. Reggie, what has been happening there?
So, look, we knew that something was going to be happening when there was a bit of a kind of a flurry of activity inside the courtroom. Around 4:30 local time, we had the note that a verdict had been reached, and this only happened kind of moments before the judge was walking back to the room to check out whether or not deliberations needed to continue, because the day was expected to actually end at 4:30. So this kind of threw everything into a bit of a chaotic bit of movement in the court. And moments later, those 34 charges against the former president were read out, and one by one, it was guilty, it was guilty, it was guilty, it was guilty. And here we are now with a former president of the United States who in just a few months is going to become the Republican nominee at the RNC convention, who now stands as a convicted felon. This is a first time, both legally and politically, in this country's history that we're at this moment.
It's crazy because Donald Trump will not even be allowed to vote for himself during the election as a convicted felon. What's going to happen with sentencing, and is there a possibility that he goes to jail?
So, look, you're absolutely correct here on the Florida part. He is a convicted felon, so that means technically that he's not able to vote for himself. And remember, he moved himself out of New York and made Florida his kind of home, his state of residency. On sentencing here, that is set to happen on July 11th. And that is important because, like I just mentioned, the RNC convention to crown him as the kind of, the nominee for the Republican Party takes place on July 15th, just 4 days after sentencing. He will be in Milwaukee to kind of continue this race forward through November. For sentencing and consequences here, look, jail was always a possibility here. The kind of runaround rule was up to 4 years per count, and it was expected that if that were to happen, that the judge would do this concurrently rather than consecutively. But most legal experts have said, because Donald Trump is a first-time offender here, that jail was likely not something that was going to happen. This would be more probation and a likely financial penalty. But again, that is something that's going to be left to the sentencing judge, and again, that takes place on July 11th.
What is it like there in front of the courthouse in New York City? Like, did you see security ramp up exponentially? Is there a feeling of unrest anywhere? Are there Trump supporters around that are upset about this verdict?
So, look, in the days leading up to this, when we knew that a verdict was likely going to come down, New York police had increased security around the court. You can see the barricades that are behind me. You can see there's a police vehicle behind me as well. There have been throngs of Trump supporters that have been out backing him and kind of parroting and echoing the claims that he has made over the last several weeks, if not the last several months, that this is a bit of political persecution. And his supporters have been kind of vehement in those claims. But in the moments after the guilty verdict was read out, there were a number of people who are anti-Trump, who are not Trump supporters, who started marching through the streets behind me, who were gathered at the corner at the courthouse there, basically saying, look, it's about time, and yelling out guilty over and over and over again, like was heard in the courtroom. And while there is a stepped-up security presence here, there isn't that imminent feeling that something chaotic could soon happen here. This just feels like the end of another court segment of the life that is Donald Trump.
You know, can we talk about the polling ramifications? Because Biden and Trump have been so tight. Trump's been beating him. But we do know that independents and some sort of soft Republicans, not MAGA types, are saying they would change their mind about voting for Donald Trump if he was convicted.
Yeah, look, there was recent polling that was out as late as yesterday that suggested, at least on the Republican side, that maybe 4 or 5% would turn on Donald Trump in the event of a guilty verdict. And while that might not seem like a lot, when you're in a neck-and-neck race with Joe Biden, losing even a tiny portion of your base, or at least your party, that could be a make-or-break moment. On the other side, when it came to independents, upwards of between 10 and 15%, if not more, could potentially turn on Donald Trump. And again, that poses problems in the race to November. Look, Joe Biden is still facing his own uphill climb. He has been dealing with a number of protest votes as the primary season went on. And there are polls that suggest that some Democrats may actually sit out rather than voting for Joe Biden. So again, as Joe Biden loses critical support, now as Donald Trump potentially loses critical support, we could see what were already expected to be razor-thin margins by the time we get to Election Day become even more razor-thin.
Now, Reggie, we saw even weeks ago the Trump team was starting to spin this in it's rigged and all the clip we played off the top of sort of how he's positioning himself. How do you see that playing out? And what was his reaction like when these 34 counts of guilty were brought to him today on this historic day?
Yeah, I mean, look, as the guilty verdict was being read out, the court reporters, the sketches will show, he sat there kind of with that stoic expression on his face, just looking forward. The moments afterwards, ultimately, is when we heard Donald Trump call this a disgrace and say that the ultimate appeal will be in November when voters head to the polls. The next step here is going to be how to spin this into a messaging positive rather than a messaging negative. And we've heard the campaign kind of over and over say that he is a victim here, both of the Department of Justice and the White House, despite the fact that this had nothing to do with the federal level. This was brought by a locally elected district attorney. But they are going to absorb this into the campaign. They are going to say, look, Donald Trump has been victimized by the Democrats, by members of the media, by non-Republicans since the day he came down that escalator in 2015. And this is a continuation of that. And they are going to hope that that works to gin up the base. The problem is over the last several years, and especially over the last few months, Donald Trump has really failed to expand the core base beyond where it already was if he wasn't seeing it contract a little bit. So however that messaging works, it may fall on some deaf ears. It may fall on ears that were never going to go anywhere in the first place. And the question is he going to do anything to draw more people in now that he is a convicted felon?
And I know that you have to go because it's a super busy afternoon for you. But we have seen a lot of high-profile Republicans fall in line. Even Nikki Haley recently saying, yeah, she would vote for him. Do you expect that we will see any of these influential Republicans maybe go, this is a step too far now?
Probably not. I mean, look, scandal after scandal has plagued Donald Trump, both before the presidency and after the presidency, whether it was the Access Hollywood tape beforehand or whether it was the attack on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol, where a mob of Donald Trump supporters tried to stop a peaceful transfer of power. No Republicans turned their back on him. And in fact, they coalesced more and stood behind Donald Trump. Look, over the course of this trial, we have seen member after member of Congress, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, sit behind Donald Trump. Nothing is going to kind of stop that grip that he has on the party. Nothing is going to stop that wall of support that most Republicans have been showing him kind of as over the last couple of weeks. It'll be an open question as to how Republicans, especially those in Congress, especially those who may be VP candidates, deal with this going forward. But in the immediate term, Donald Trump is going to kind of, be facing a new reality here, one that he never thought that he would be facing, in that he is a convicted felon and that a jury of his own peers in New York, found him guilty of 34 charges. Trump claimed he would never get a fair trial here because Manhattan is so democratic. That is something that's going to be brought into the messaging now.
Unbelievable reporting, Reggie. Thank you so much for shoehorning into our show, into your incredibly busy day. We appreciate you more than we can say.
Thanks, Reggie.
Thank you.
Reggie Cecchini reporting from New York. I'm still wrapping my head around it because I hoped for this result just because Donald Trump is a man who has managed to dodge consequences his entire life. And when you talk about this trial being unfair, you could look at what's happening with Judge Aileen Cannon on the documents case, and people say that is a case of justice going afoul there. So I think that Donald Trump has somehow managed to, they call him the Teflon Don.
Yeah.
He has somehow managed to squeak his way out of virtually any tight spot he's been in until today. And that is the part that I think is really, really important. Less about Trump and more about the justice system, that this was not some political group. This was a jury of his peers, 12 regular people who looked at the evidence and made a decision. And now he is a convicted felon, the first ever former president of the United States to be found guilty
of a felony.
I'm a little concerned for the jurors. I'm concerned for Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels, Karen McDougal, anybody whose name came up, even Pecker, because Donald Trump has surrounded himself with thugs his entire life, and people's lives have been put
Destroyed.
in danger.
Destroyed.
People have been swatted.
Yeah.
Judges and people, anyone around the Trump, anyone in the Trump orbit who he feels, because he's on his whole campaign is about retribution.
We'll be talking about this for years to come. There will be university classes, courses about the politics that we are witnessing unfold in the United States
I'm sorry,
right now.
can I just do that?
You may.
I've been wanting to do this for a very long time.
What's the weirdest thing you've found while you're out for a walk, a dog walk, whatever? Well, and what the hell tonight? We have a story. It's going to blow your mind.
Also, if you have a mortgage coming up for renewal, you are going to be in for a world of pain soon. And that is very bad news for Prime Minister Trudeau's re-election hopes.
We have some good times to be had here with our viewing party. Yep, you're entered to win a gift card for the CHEK, Brad in Victoria.
We also have Ivy, who's not looking all that impressed to be in the photo.
She loves watching our show, Ivy does. Randy and Souk also a big fan.
And Tom in Winnipeg, thanks for sending in the photo.
You can get in on the fun by taking a picture of you watching us. Email us at viewingparty@chekmedia.ca. Tell us where you're watching from. We're back in a moment.